Hi, and welcome to The One Thing. I am your host, Seth Avergon, and today I have on a friend and colleague, Hassan Archer. Hassan has a really interesting background, so I'm excited to hear about his one thing today. Hassan has a background in product management, spending many years at Microsoft, working on products there. And then after that, he did pretty much a complete 180 and started studying psychology. Matter of fact, you have your master's in clinical psychology, yes?
Yes, I do.
Outstanding. And you focused on marriage and family therapy?
Correct. Yep.
I do want to get into your one thing, but I would love to take a moment to help understand, how did you get from really very, very linear thinking and thinking about working with software to wanting to study counseling?
Yeah. So while I was at Microsoft, I got to work on some really exciting projects, lots of cutting edge technology, and I loved what I did. The challenge I had was with team dynamics. I felt that the way that teams interacted with leadership, with each other, wasn't really conducive to long-term success, and at least the way that I like to do work. So I left that and I disavowed myself of technology. I said, you know what? I don't want to work in software anymore. I'm done with that world. I want to go work with people, bring humanity back. And so I said, I'm going to go and change. So that's when I went and decided to do therapy. And everybody said to me, you're insane. Like, nobody does mathematical programming based studies, technology, and then goes to the other side and does the therapy and humanity side. But I did. And the reason for that is I think that's what's missing. I think we're missing humanities and humanity in general inside of software development and product management, because software is built by people. People work in teams. If you can't figure out the team dynamics, your software is not going to ship. And so that's what brought me to that other side. And then after I did my master's, I meshed those two worlds together. And consulting is essentially helping companies figure out what their blockers are to get their products out the door, help fix team dysfunctions, and make sure their products are going to be well received by people in the marketplace, which is, of course, psychology.
Wow. You really have one of the more unique backgrounds of the people I've chatted with, the people I know, and that's why I'm so excited to have you here today.
Yeah.
So without further ado, Hassan Archer, what is your one thing?
My one thing is I tell everyone to bring the elephant in the room. So when I say bring the elephant in the room, that's a kind of fancy way of saying talk about the things that you don't want to talk about. Because in your organization or your company, the thing that you're not addressing is probably the thing that's holding back your growth. The thing that you're making all these plans around and no one wants to talk about in the room, but everyone knows is there, that is the thing that you need to actually talk about. And it might feel really awkward and really uncomfortable, and it's something we just don't talk about, but that's the thing that you actually should be talking about. And it's embracing your fear of, if we talk about this, what exactly is going to happen? And if you talk about it, things are going to change. Change is difficult. So I tell everybody, my job is to help you bring the elephants in the room so we can talk about them and move forward.
I love that. And you know, that's incredibly timely. I mean, you're talking about difficult discussions.
Yeah.
And we as a society are in a place where we need to have a lot
Correct.
of difficult discussions, but nobody seems to know how to do it or
Yes.
even how to get started.
Yes.
Do you have some thoughts on how do you start a difficult discussion with someone?
So there's an element of trust that I think needs to be in place. And without that trust and that sense of safety, it's really hard to have those discussions. So a lot of times what you'll find is the person that brings up that difficult discussion is labeled as the villain, because they're bringing up the thing that, oh, we don't really talk about that here. That's not how we do things. And this person doesn't get us, right? But at the same time, people are like, oh my goodness, I can breathe. Someone's actually going to discover this and talk about it. That's amazing. So what you have to have is someone who's willing to walk into that discussion and say, hey, I'm the new guy here. This is what I'm seeing. Is anyone else seeing this? Right. And you kind of give people permission to say, well, yeah, actually, now that you mention it, yeah, we do kind of do that thing. Or actually, so-and-so really hasn't been performing for a long time, but we've been afraid to say it because it's the boss's son. Or, yeah, the market's been telling us this for a long time, but we're in a culture where you can't really admit that you're wrong, because then it's about admitting weakness. And so we don't want to do that. But since you bring it up, right, that's where you can have that conversation. And I think you'll see that inside a lot of companies, a lot of dysfunctional teams, toxic workplaces, right? It's the stuff you just don't talk about. And I think back to your point about society in general, I think there's a lot of things that we just are afraid to talk about. And it's because no one wants to bring that up, right? Nobody wants to be the person that's hated. And if you look at, again, you kind of bring the world of therapy into what we do in companies. If you've ever gone to a therapist office and processed something with a partner, or marriage therapy, or family concerns, the therapist plays the role of the villain. You know, they take the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune so that, you know, you interrupt this back and forth crossfire, and you got to redirect it someplace so that then you can say, okay, hey, I'm just here as the person trying to facilitate the conversation, but what I'm seeing on this side is this, what I'm seeing on that side is that. What do we do with this, right? How do we fix this? Is it worth fixing? Like, is the pain of addressing this issue worth it? Because on the other side of that hill, it's going to be a whole lot better. And that's the conversation that we need to have.
I love that. That's so important. That's so powerful what you're talking about, Hassan. Yeah, I mean, as we talked about earlier before we got on, yeah, I mean, my undergrad was psych, and so I've seen a lot of organizations, right? I've seen the good, and not unlike you, I've seen the bad. There is, as you said, there is another side of that hill if you're willing to do the work.
You got to do the work. And a lot of times companies will spend outrageous sums of money to avoid having those discussions, right? The idea is that if we just hire the right person, we can bring in the superhero, the savior that will miraculously spread fairy dust, and then we'll get through this issue without having to talk about it. And the reality is all you do is end up spending a lot of money on someone who then comes in, sees the issue, realizes what the problem is, realizes there's no willingness to change it in that organization, and then they eventually quit. So you're just out, 6 or 12 months worth of an expensive salary, rather than stepping back and saying, we have this issue. We're all pretty smart here at this company, right? I think people in general know what the issues are. Are we willing to do what it takes to fix it?
With the move to remote and now more hybrid workforces, how do you see that playing into addressing that elephant?
That's interesting. There's a couple of things I think that work really well with remote. One of those things is you have access to people you don't have access to before. So you're not tied to necessarily finding someone who's local in your area to come in and fly in and spend a lot of time with you. You can do that over Zoom. You can do that via phone calls. Right, the whole a lot of consulting practices now are all done remote. So I think that opens the door for that. I do think, however, there's as people we have different ways of communicating. Some people are much more. They use their hands. Like I'm a very, you can see my hand in the screen. Like I gesticulate a lot. I do a lot of gestures. It's a little bit weird doing it on Zoom because it's like these hands come up from the bottom of the screen. You're like, whose hands are those, right? But when you're in a real environment with somebody, your body language is a huge part of communication. Right? So much of it is nonverbal, and so you have to be really intentional to bring that into a remote session and be aware of it. Right? You've got to be willing to have. If I'm sitting with someone on Zoom and we're talking through their organization or company, and I'm asking them very pointed questions about what's going on, like, hey, you've had this issue for 3 years. Why now, right? Why not 2 years ago when you realized that you had this problem, right? That can come across as very argumentative, right? Very in your face. But if we're in the same room together and we're just kicking back, maybe having a cup of coffee, we're just chatting, then you've built that kind of natural rapport and you don't feel like you're on the spot quite as much. So you just have to be more sensitive to those personal dynamics because it's really easy to get things misconstrued when you're not face to face. Right. And it's a lot easier for me to cancel my phone call with you and just hit this button here and hang up. But if I'm in your office talking with you, it's a little bit more difficult to back out of that.
Right. That makes sense. Hassan, thank you. This
was
amazing. As I said, I didn't want to know your one thing before the call. And so it totally makes sense now that, knowing what I know of you, but I hadn't thought that. I wasn't sure what you were going to come in with. So thank you again.
My pleasure.
Thank you for being here. And for everybody else out there, thank you for watching us on The One Thing.